Dave, again, grateful to you for making time. You and I texted a little bit earlier, and the first thing I want to talk to you about is turnout. Um, uh, in my sense of this year, is that there's not been a ton of engagement. That we don't have the footprint, the number of offices, the number of staff, the number of events that we've seen in some other competitive caucuses. So I'm wondering, leaving the weather aside for a moment, which is obviously a big variable, in the last contested Republican caucus in 2016, 186,000 people
Mm-hmm.
participated in the Republican caucus. Do you think we're on track to match that, exceed that, not get there? What's your sense?
My sense is we're not going to get there. Um, it's important to understand in context the turnout is probably the biggest unknown factor we have, and it is the biggest variable factor that we have in the caucuses. In 1996, now I go back to 1984, I think was my first caucus, so 40 years now of caucusing. 96, I think we had about 96,000 Republicans who turned out in that race. Uh, and we had about 120,000 if you averaged out caucus attendance going back to the about that time or earlier. So we've averaged 125,000 people. 2016 was by far the high water mark. Some of it was Trump bringing a lot of new people into the caucuses who'd never caucused before. What campaigns typically do is they find the 150 or so thousand people who have ever caucused and they focus on those voters. Trump has an appeal that kind of works outside of that, and that's why you grew that number so much in 2016. Now, I think you're right. In this cycle, it doesn't feel like 2016. It feels like the campaign has been more static for a longer period of time. There's been a ton of money spent. There's no question. People are seeing the TV ads. They're getting phone calls. I'm not sure how many doors Never Back Down is knocked on, but I'm sure it's more than 400,000, which means they've hit everybody about 3 times. AFP has done a lot of doors for Nikki. Trump's campaign has done a lot of doors. There's text messages and emails, all the ways that people get touched with these campaigns. And so there's no shortage of information headed towards people in this caucus. I think that we're going to see I've set the over under at about 150,000, which would be more than normal historically, but less than in 2016. And I think it's for some of the reasons you said. There doesn't seem to be quite the excitement, quite the controversy. I think a lot of people just assume Trump's on his way to the coronation. The national polling numbers have only gotten better for him. His caucus numbers have only gotten better. Remember when we started this whole thing last November, kind of looking past 2022 and what was going to happen, DeSantis was within spitting distance of Trump, and you had a whole bunch of things happen, with the indictments and et cetera, et cetera. DeSantis gets in late May. Trump attacks him for several months unanswered. So for a lot of reasons, Trump has kind of grown over time. And I wonder if that's kind of sapped some of the energy out of this, because I don't know that people sort of see this. I just don't think people look at it as competitive as they once did, even in this cycle. So for that reason, I'm putting it at 150. Now, my other observation about turnout, and I'd be interested in others' thoughts, particularly people who are on the ground in Iowa a little bit more than I have been, although I've been there quite a bit. I think above 150,000 turnout, Trump just starts to expand the lead that he has, because he's got, it's just basic math. If you're polling at 52, 53%, you got 600,000 Republicans in Iowa. The more of them you turn out, he's got a bunch more people that are for him. If you're polling at 18, 20, 22%, the available universe for you is a lot smaller. So as we grow the turnout, it just gets harder and harder for Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis to try to go out and match those numbers to get within any kind of respectable distance of Trump. Right. They'll have to turn out 80% of the people they've identified as supporters. If Trump turns out even 50% of the people that he's identified as supporters, which is really the job of the caucus, Trump's going to win already, right? So the bigger that number grows, the higher his delivery of his built-in support, that is his ballot share, the bigger that number gets. So I think that's kind of the Maginot line for Trump, sort of the danger zone. If turnout's under 150, probably something's gone wrong in his campaign to get people out. Maybe there are too many first-time caucus goers. He's got 63% of first-time caucus goers are for him, according to Ann Seltzer's latest poll, and that's really the only poll that I look at with a lot of respect. But if they're going to be a first-time caucus goer, there's a lot of impediments to attending a caucus, and it's not just weather. It's unfamiliarity with the process. It's maybe they don't have quite the same level of education about how to do it, how to participate, how to get there. There's a whole bunch of things that can stop people from making that final commitment. So I think turnout under 150,000, which would revert more to the mean of what we've seen over the years, probably helps DeSantis and Haley, because I'm assuming they have a greater share of those regular caucus goers that you don't have to do as much education with. So that's kind of where I see it. The one thing I'll say though is that we know this about Trump. He is an absolute turnout machine for people who like him and for people who don't like him, and that includes inside the Republican Party. So I wouldn't encourage anyone to bet against the over. I might take the over because all we've ever seen out of Trump is that he just blows turnout, through the roof. Right. So that this is going to be the most interesting thing, I think, to watch on caucus night as results start to come in.
Okay, I want to talk about turnout and the weather in a second, but let's just level set. No doubt in your mind, Trump finishes first, right?
No doubt in my mind. If it were not to happen, it would be a thunderclap in our politics. It would immediately upset the race and shift it quickly. You could see 3 days later, Nikki Haley be winning New Hampshire by 10 points because Trump would look vulnerable for the first time in many, many, many months.
Right. But if you were putting some of the Kochel rent money or mortgage money down on second place, you'd put the money on DeSantis and not Haley, right, for second?
Yeah. So this is the tougher question for me because momentum versus mechanics, right? She's had the momentum. Now, the last couple of weeks, you can argue, haven't been the best in her campaign, but generally the trend has been for her sort of growing the share of people who are looking at her events are bigger on the ground right now than DeSantis. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people coming to her stuff that have never been to an event to see her before. So there's a enthusiasm on the ground that she has that I think DeSantis is kind of struggling to keep up with. But he does have, those hundreds of thousands of knocked doors. He's got, I'm sure, more precinct leaders. He's got more IDs than she does. He's got a bigger staff.
I think he's got more IDs than she does by a lot.
I think probably that's true by a lot because they've covered that ground so many times. Now, here's the thing. If you were a DeSantis supporter in June, are you still a DeSantis supporter? Are they counting they've gone back to these people multiple times. Is this their cumulative number or is this their current right now today? Who can we identify number? And it's pretty hard to get inside a campaign and know what that number is. That said, I've seen campaigns with no idea who supported them. Huckabee. Mike Huckabee could not tell you who went out to vote for him. He didn't have an operation to do that. He relied on, the family leader and Bob Vander Plaats's group and other conservative Christian organizations. Rick Santorum, he had no staff on the ground. Same thing. So momentum in those cases definitely Trump mechanics.
Let me ask you though about differentiating between Santorum and Huckabee momentum versus Haley momentum. And I think, as you said, it's an open question how much momentum she has in Iowa because she's not had the best earned media for the last couple of weeks. Right. Those guys, Huckabee, Santorum, natural fit for the profile of a caucus goer, right? More religious conservative. She's going largely for suburban voters and for anti-Trump voters. So does the natural turnout of those people happen as organically and in the same strength as the turnout would be for a Huckabee or for a Santorum? No, it doesn't. It definitely has a more limiting, potential. Rubio, you look at Rubio's campaign, and that's really her coalition as I can piece it together. He won 5 counties in Iowa. He won Dallas, Polk, Story, Johnson, and Scott. He didn't win Lynn, but I think he came closer in Lynn. So these are the urban counties. They have the suburban precincts. Now, a lot of those people
that he was counting on in those suburbs are not Republicans anymore. Now, are they willing to come back and caucus for Nikki because she feels different, sounds different, and offers a little more hope for the party as they remember it? Yeah, sure, she could be doing that, and I think that is what her appeal is. But you're right, she can't do at scale what those two were able to do. But by the way, if we're talking about evangelicals and whether or not they do what they've traditionally done, which is form together in those last 6 weeks of the campaign and almost move as a cohesive unit to one candidate, that's not happening this time. There's going to be a split among evangelicals for the first time since 2000, when George W. Bush had his share, and then you had other evangelical candidates like Gary Bauer and several who are also kind of carving it up. That there's been no carving up of the evangelical base in Iowa for the last 3 cycles, but this cycle there is. And I would break it down like this: Vanderplats, Dace, kind of the evangelical establishment, more college educated, maybe more Northwest Iowa located. They're going to be more inclined to be for DeSantis. They're more connected to the political process. Trump's going to have a lot of evangelicals too. He rolled out 150 or so faith leaders right at the same time DeSantis was doing that, which is the first time we've seen that from him. And he's drawing more from, I would say, the more typical Trump demographic, which is the non-college white working class. So maybe more Northeast Iowa, Eastern Iowa in general. And, places like the east side of Des Moines, these are self-described evangelicals. They're not as regular of church attenders as the people who are kind of in that DeSantis coalition, but they're definitely a big group of them there for Trump. And so we're going to see this, and this is what really limits DeSantis's potential, is that he's not going to have the wholesale investment of these evangelicals the way other candidates have had, and that they have used to go put up big numbers in the caucuses.
So what do you think, again, not knowing what turnout is, what do you think the percentage floor and ceiling are for Trump?
I don't think it'd be hard to see him getting below 45. It'd be, if turnout is just a blowout, I could see him getting into the 55 to 60 range, but that would be just a dominant performance. That would really, I think, take the sales out of everybody. Right. So I think that somewhere in that range, I don't think he wants to be under 50%, because I think that's not great news for him. The way the Gang of 500 talks about it will not be as positive as if he goes out and meets his current polling number, which is somewhere around 52 or 3. And we'll see what Selzer puts out on Saturday night, because I'm sure she's got a poll in the field now. But, he's going to be measured against what that poll says.
So if he gets 45, and let's say Ramaswamy and Hutchinson and Christie get 5 between them, that leaves 50, right? That leaves 50 for DeSantis and Haley, right?
Yeah.
So if they split, it's 25-25, 45-25 would be a pretty sizable win, and probably not give much momentum, or not probably wouldn't give any momentum to anybody. And you think 45 is his low mark. And I think you're probably right. Maybe a little lower, right? But probably about 45. So then the question is, go ahead.
You can't avoid the argument then that over half of Iowa caucus goers were somebody else, right? So I don't think that's the easiest messaging moment for him if he ends up at 45.
Your messaging as an anti-Trump Republican would be, he didn't get more than half win it for somebody else. Their messaging will be, he shattered the George W. Bush record of the biggest margin. I mean, he will have tripled the record of the biggest margin.
I get
or doubled it, I guess.
That's how I would message it if I was a pro-Trump Republican. But look, he's running also as a quasi-incumbent. He's running as if he's president, and a lot of his voters think he still is. But look, we can also go to history and look at this. Mark, 1984, Walter Mondale had 45% in the caucuses. He beat his closest competitor by 30 points. Gary Hart got 15%. And what was the news going into New Hampshire? Gary Hart, right? So because the Gang of 500 is going to look for something to be interesting, and they're going to try to make that real.
Right. So that's why second has been so fiercely contested for, right? Because if DeSantis is second, and again, we can play with their 50% share that we've given the two of them. It could be 30-20, right?
Yeah.
It could be,
Yeah.
I think it could be 35-15.
Wow.
I think it's possible that Haley
DeSantis over Haley?
Yeah, possible. I'm not predicting it, but I think it's possible because I really think between her bumpy news cycles and a lack of an operation, and I don't know how much AFP did for her, but I really do think it's possible
I do.
that she.
I do.
You do what?
I know how much
You agree
AFP
with me,
did
or
for her.
okay?
No,
How much
I disagree. Well,
Yeah.
I know they have.
So what do you
over
think? So
100.
what do you think her floor is?
I would put her floor at 18, but more
Okay,
like
not
20.
much different. That's not much. Not much different
Yeah,
than 15.
okay, I'll go out on a limb and say 20. So Rubio had 24% in 2016 in a very competitive environment where you also had Christie and Jeb and all kinds of other people who were at like 8 or 12%, right? So that Rubio coalition is a little bit bigger now. There might be attrition in the party in those precincts where those kinds of voters are, and I'd be interested in hearing from some of your suburban Republicans who are on this call, one of whom I'm looking at right now. But I think
just to go back to that point, just go back to the point because you've made it a couple times, and I've not seen other stuff on this. You think it's possible that the Rubio, Romney, Jeb wing, Haley wing of the party has enough of them have left the process that could put a lower ceiling on her because they're just not going to caucus even for her because they're so disgusted with the Trump Republican Party?
No, actually, I don't think. I just think that they have left the party, and it just kind of depends on the terms under which they left. Because I think she has potential to get a lot of people out who are registered no parties. Now, remember, everybody talks about New Hampshire being an open primary. Iowa's an open caucus. You can be unregistered, you can be a Democrat, a no party, and all you have to do is be an eligible elector, and you can actually vote at the caucus as long as you register. So I actually think she has some potential to bring some of those people over. And we only need about 5,000, 7,500 of those to make a real difference.
Right. I know AFP obviously hasn't focused nationally. They have focused on Iowa, and maybe they've made a big difference. But I continue to go back to, and again, this is before her bad run of gas. Her national number is not great. Her New Hampshire number is great, but you've not seen kind of a national coalescing of the anti-Trump Republican Party nationally in any national poll. I mean, I think her highest is around 20, and most of it's lower than that. So she'd have to really be breaking through in Iowa in a much different way than she is anywhere but New Hampshire. And
she would.
It's a caucus, and it's an electorate. Even though you're right, non-Republicans can turn out. It's an electorate, a caucus electorate that is pretty conservative.
Yeah, but remember, Mark, we're talking about a different scale of turnout. If it's only 150,000, 175,000 people, 7,500 people, 10,000 people, there's no reason why she couldn't pull some of those former Republicans who are suburban moms, who don't like Biden, who can't stand Trump, back into the caucus. I've had conversations with a lot of people. I don't see an organized effort on that. I feel like there should have been one. Right. But I've had plenty of conversations with people who are doing that. In fact, I have family members who are re-registering to go vote in the caucus. I talked to two of them yesterday, and they're not voting for Trump, and they're not voting for DeSantis. So,
re-registering meaning they're Republicans who left the party because of Trump, but they're going to caucus for
her. Yep, a couple of them. One who kind of jumps back and forth because it's Johnson County. He wants to protect himself from the socialists in primaries. So that's one of those voters. Another one who kind of left the party entirely, who is like, I really would like to see the Republican Party do better. And again, scale is different in these caucuses. Are there 50,000 people to do that? No. But there are enough, I think, if it manifests to happen. By the way, here's some more history for you, because I know you like some of this stuff. 2008, I went back and checked the Democratic voter registration numbers for January of 08 and February of 08. The caucuses were January 3rd. There were 56,000 more Democrats in February of 08 than there were in January of 08. Now, you can argue that wasn't all for Obama. There were definitely some women who came over to support
And
Hillary
some
because
and some Edwards too.
maybe, yeah. But I mean, so that gives you, and that's in a huge blowout caucus where they had 240,000 turnout. But that's, gosh, that's 20% of the turnout or so. So
What's
or higher.
yeah. What's your sense of what Governor Reynolds has done? I know she's done events with him, but is her operation made a big difference for DeSantis?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. First of all, she energized the campaign at a time when it desperately needed it, because DeSantis has been in a sort of negative news cycle, really since the day he got in the race in late May. And all you saw for, months there was him just declining over time. And I think she was the best news that campaign had in the fall. She also brought a lot of energy to the events. They have a good chemistry. She makes him a better candidate when she's in the room with him. They'll do that sort of sit down format where she'll interview him. She brings things out of him that don't come out in the 10-minute stump speech. So I think in a lot of ways she's improved his effort. Obviously, she's got a big network. She took the Branstad, operation and improved on it markedly. So I think she's helped him a lot. Now, it hasn't changed his poll numbers, but I do think it's improved the ground game, the energy on the ground, the level of commitment. These people now feel like they're fighting for something together with their governor, and if you're in the Vanderplats orbit with him. So I think she helped a lot. And I wonder if we'll see it come out in this next poll. I wonder if we'll see any dynamic change. I'm a little bit concerned that if the numbers just come out and look the same as they did, we're probably going to see a pretty big night for Donald Trump, and nobody's really going to be able to step on that story.
If I want to use just a few more questions, then we're going to open up the floor to others. If the poll comes out, again, the poll comes out Saturday nights. Historically, we have no reason to think it's different. If the poll comes out and DeSantis or Haley are in second and they put some distance between themselves and third, regardless of how close they are to Trump, do you think that affects turnout positively? In other words, creates a sense of momentum that helps that candidate in a pretty decisive way, or is the psychology reverse than that, or no effect?
No, I think a lot of this is psychological. A lot of this is how it feels right now, how much, how hopeful you can be. I think, if Haley comes out and is ahead of DeSantis, I've heard private polls that say that. I've heard private polls that say the other way. If Haley were to be leading DeSantis, I think it would be a pretty big deal.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And I think if DeSantis is ahead, it would also be a pretty big deal, because he's looked as though he's faltered and he looks a bit at risk. So Haley has the most to gain going into New Hampshire because she's strong there already. I don't know what DeSantis has to gain going into New Hampshire. I think DeSantis got to articulate for us what the strategy is. If he has a good night in Iowa, where does he go? Is he going to say, "Oh, well, we're going to wait till Michigan"? You're going to wait till Michigan? I mean, the race will be over by Michigan if we don't see somebody actually beat Trump or tie Trump or come really close.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that, because you spent a lot of time over the last year plus, I think, thinking about how to stop Donald Trump in Iowa, on the theory that if he wasn't stopped in Iowa, he might be unstoppable. So that didn't happen. There were some ads that talked about, I think the message that most of the research I heard about suggested would be the best to stop Trump in Iowa was what Nikki Haley has seized on, which is fairly or unfairly, chaos follows him wherever he goes. The electability argument, which was part of that there was so much chaos he'd lose, has been undermined, I think, for a lot of Iowa Republicans, because he's ahead of Joe Biden in most polls.
Yeah.
So
thanks, Biden.
I'll ask you this. If you could turn the clock back 18 months and knew that Donald Trump was a threat to get over 50%, is there something different that the anti-Trump, stop Trump in Iowa forces could have tried? Or you pretty much had all the research and there wasn't anything?
The best research that we had, and I did, you're right, weeks and weeks of focus groups. I don't know, I sat in more than a dozen. The best that we had was a permission structure ad, a series of them actually, and these are the ones that we aired. The permission
explain to people, when you
ad,
say we, explain to people who the we is.
The we is a major PAC that you're all aware of, who I shouldn't name. but that took a pretty strongly anti-Trump. Very conservative PAC took an anti-Trump position at the beginning. So the permission structure ad goes like this: It's I love Donald Trump. He was a great president. I voted for him twice, but, and then you followed the but with several different messages that when you test them in a straight negative ad didn't work at all and got people's backs up. But when you test them in that kind of an ad where you go at him real soft and subtle, worked pretty well, at least held his numbers down. And we tested this in some markets, and we took some other control markets out of the testing, and his numbers were much better in the markets that we didn't air those ads in. So I know there's been a bunch of memos about this that got reported, but the evidence was a little more compelling than those memos suggested, that we could actually put doubts in people's mind about Trump. So I voted for him twice, but I'm concerned that so many people hate him. I'm concerned that the media will never treat him fairly. I'm concerned that they'll rig the election again. I'm concerned that he's too chaotic. I'm not allowed to Thanksgiving anymore because I can't get along. I can't talk to my sister. I'd rather not that be part of our politics. So those kinds of messages where you tap into the discomfort that people who like Trump have about him, they were effective. But what you needed at the same time as that was a surge coming from someone else. So you could, say, okay, well, okay, that's fine. I agree with that. Let's not take a risk on Trump for these several reasons, but I got to have somebody that I can invest in. And in the meantime, DeSantis was in decline. Haley hadn't shown up yet. We weren't at the debate period yet because these ads ran in July and August. So is there something we could have done different? Not really. And by the way, every negative ad we tested on Trump, the kind of ads that we're seeing Haley and DeSantis run against each other now, Nikki Haley is terrible on China, or scary Ron DeSantis, let China build or buy land by a base, or whatever. Those ads against Trump never worked. We tested every possible message against him, including things like, we didn't test this in an ad, but we put it into the focus group, the fact that he owned Miss Universe and allowed a biological male to compete in Miss Universe. You told voters that, they didn't believe you. You could show them the quotes and they didn't believe you. No, that couldn't have happened. Or if it did happen, it wasn't his fault. Somebody made him do that. You could attack him on the wall. Well, that's because Mitch McConnell wouldn't let him build it, or Paul Ryan. You could attack him on spending. Well, that's Congress's fault. It's not his. He has antibodies built up from the conservative media ecosystem that you would not believe. He is impenetrable. When you go at him with a straight negative attack, and this is what I fear about Biden too, because I don't think they're going to know how to do this. When you just go at Trump with a straight attack, his base, the greatest political insight in our modern era is his insight, which is I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and I wouldn't lose a vote. And that's where we are right now.
Yep. Let me ask you two more questions, and then we're going to open it up. And folks, if you want to ask questions, if you can raise your hand, but if you want to ask a question, put it in the chat, and so I can preview it a little bit. Two more questions for me. First is, how will you watch on Monday? How will you sort of take in the results to get a sense of where things are?
Well, I'm going to mostly be interested in the Haley performance, and it's easier to understand because it's so consolidated. So I'm going to be watching Dallas. I'm going to be watching Story, and I'm going to be watching probably Scott, which has a lot of bad.
What does she need? What does she need in those counties?
She needs to be in the 30s in those counties, or high 20s in those counties. They're big. Remember, Polk County is 10% of the state.
Yeah. So how she does there, you watch. And then lastly, again, the weather. What do campaigns need to do? I remember in 2008. Obviously you send cars, vans for folks, but I remember the Hillary people had shovels that they were giving out. Like, what do you need to do if you're a campaign to deal with the weather?
Well, we won't need shovels because there's not any snow expected after today. So I think we're good there. I think the rides is a big thing because when you have elderly people, they don't want to go out as dark, obviously, in the middle of the winter, as we know. I think the offering rides, having vans, particularly in those big precincts where you need a lot of help. There's going to be a bunch of places that these campaigns just don't get to. There's only 4,000 people live in Taylor County. They're not going to have vans posted down there. So I think you go to those big target precincts. You can rank them pretty easy because every good campaign has a precinct vote goal in every single precinct, 1,700 in Iowa. And you rank those, and then you aim at those big ones, and you put in place these fail safes that go out and get people there. You try to get people to show up early so that if they're not there at 6:30 or 6:40, you can call them.
Right.
And they'll have big giant phone banks getting data fed into them that are rolling all night long trying to get people to come to the caucus. Because even if you show up at 7:10, chances are the speeches are going on, you can get registered, get into the caucus and vote. So there's a lot that'll be happening. But I don't think we're going to see any shovels. I think we're going to see a lot of rides given, particularly in a lot of precincts where the average age of voters are going to be over 60, maybe 70.
Right.
It's cold, bitter cold, and so that's what they'll be looking to do. Come pick you up in a warm car.
Okay, Dave, thank you. All right, we're going to go to your questions now. If I call on you, you can raise your hand if you haven't for whatever reason submitted in the chat. If I call on you, please just unmute yourself, turn your camera on, and ask us your question with the camera on. And we'll start with. Let me just say one thing. There are a lot of Iowa experts who don't know about national politics, and I always laugh when they interview some Iowa professor about, what does DeSantis need to do to do well in Michigan? With all due respect, most Iowa professors don't know much about Michigan. Dave, part of why Dave is so important to our discussion is because he knows about the inside of Iowa, but he also knows what it means, what the expectation games means, and the momentum game means into New Hampshire and beyond. So some of your questions pertain to that, which is great because Dave can answer them. So let me ask Scott Melmet. Scott, unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
There we go. Okay, just appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Scott, can you turn your camera on if you would?
Okay.
If you can, just so we can see. There you go. Go ahead, Scott.
In terms of percentages, assuming Trump is the winner, how close to DeSantis and or Haley need to be to consider it a quote unquote victory?
Maybe the most important question of the night. Dave, go ahead. Scott, thank you.
I think it's a different number for each of them because of the investment DeSantis has put in Iowa, the resources, the people, the 99 county full Grassley, all of the effort there. And it's really the only place where he has been poised to break through. I think he needs to be closer than Haley because he carries higher expectations. I think he wants to be inside of 15 if he can get there. Inside of 20, maybe he can turn it into if he's 8 or 10 points ahead of Nikki and he's within 20 of Trump, maybe he can turn that into gold. I don't know. It'd be really hard to do. But if he's inside of 15 and Trump's under 50, maybe even under 45, it wouldn't be that hard to make that an interesting story for him. The question really for him though is where is he pointing? Where's he putting the next expectations? Because he's fourth in New Hampshire right now, and the result out of Iowa isn't always a guarantee it's going to help you in New Hampshire, right? Because New Hampshire, oftentimes, as we heard Nikki Haley say, is the corrective to Iowa. They say we pick corn, they pick presidents. New Hampshireites are they're very contrarian to the Iowa result, particularly when we send an evangelical their way.
So, Dave, if let's say DeSantis does well, let's say it's Trump 45, DeSantis 35, which I think is possible, right?
Yeah.
What would your message be if you were DeSantis, and where would you go? Because going to New Hampshire seems like kind of a fool's errand for him. So and South Carolina is, far in the distance. So what would you do if you were DeSantis, if you do have a big night like that?
So it feels like there's no opportunity in Nevada to do anything. It's so Trump heavy.
It may be his best state.
It probably is his best state, and it's a weird process, and it's very bifurcated. Nikki's in the primary. Trump and DeSantis are in the caucus. I mean, I think I'd probably try to be. I guess you'd look to Super Tuesday, and you'd also try to be respectable in South Carolina, because whatever happens. So here's a thing to know. There's 40 days between the Iowa caucuses and the South Carolina primary. That's the longest period of time ever. That means there's 32 days between New Hampshire and South Carolina. There's a lot of campaign to happen there. If Nikki somehow comes far short of what her expectations were in South Carolina, the money doesn't come to her anymore. There's a chance that DeSantis, who's, got the military background, South Carolina loves their military candidates, he might try to put a dent in things there and see if he can get her out of the way. But, there's a whole bunch of states on Super Tuesday. I don't see it. I honestly don't see it. It's gonna.
So you're
it's
saying
gonna be what?
even if he has a spectacular performance on Monday, you're saying you don't see any place for him to go.
Well, I mean, I don't think that he has. I don't think he can improve on where he is in New Hampshire, and that means he's left with a sort of stale Iowa performance that lives for 32 days between New Hampshire and South Carolina when nothing else is going on. Trump's still not debating anybody. At that point, Trump's just calling it a coronation. We shouldn't even have these primaries. Just, make me the president and let's go. He's got a really tricky second act if he does really well in Iowa. And I don't know where it is. Now, other things we can't control or foresee, Trump's trials, maybe something happens there. Maybe Nikki underperforms so badly in New Hampshire that she gets out. I mean, lots of things can happen that we don't see over the horizon. But boy, it's really tough to draw a straight linear plan for him that gets him healthy through Super Tuesday so that he can go down to Florida and do well. And as we've seen, Trump's pretty popular in Florida, even if it was just Trump and DeSantis. I don't know how he gets it done.
What does his campaign look like if he finishes third, but he says he wants to continue? Does he get any money? Does he get any press coverage?
No, it's over for him at that point, I think. And if he stays in or gets out before New Hampshire, probably irrelevant, because I would guess half of his, single digits in New Hampshire will go to Trump and half of them will go to Haley, because I think he does have some anti-Trump vote that won't go there. It's not like all of them will move to Trump in a block. I think it'll be a wash. So he goes to New Hampshire, finishes in single digits, maybe even in fourth place, assuming Christie stays in.
Right. Okay.
And then I think he's done.
Okay. Jerry Austin, will you come on and ask your question?
Okay. My question is more about the Iowa poll. I'm not aware of any other poll in politics that is as important as the Iowa poll, especially when it's published the Saturday before the election, or Saturday night before the election. And so my question is, isn't it sort of outrageous that this poll may have more to do with the outcome of the election than actually what happens on Monday?
I mean, it's an interesting point. I think it's not outrageous. It's a tradition. It goes back decades. It's a unique poll because she has a methodology which stands apart from every other poll we see out of Iowa. So you can take all the other polls you see in Iowa, whether it's CNN or Marist or Quinnipiac or whoever, and you can put them all in a bunch, and none of them are as important, as accurate, and as really sort of capturing what's about to happen as her poll is. She has a very different methodology than all the other pollsters use. So it's really important from that perspective. Does it put its foot on the gas or put a finger on the scale, I think is what you're saying? Yeah, it probably does, because it has a psychological impact on the voter. But that goes every kind of way. I remember the race in 2020, Joni Ernst running for Senate. That last, Teresa Greenfield was her Democratic opponent. She had been leading in a number of polls. The Real Clear Politics polling average had that race as a dead heat. The Iowa poll comes out the Saturday night before. Ernst is up 7. She wins by 7. Did releasing that poll create the 7-point win, or did that poll tell us what was going to actually happen because it was accurate? So, I mean, it's a little bit of cart and horse. I think, first of all, they're the media. They're free to run a poll whenever they want to and publish it however they want to and whatever they want to. It might feel like there's a finger on the scale. I think what it does is it more kind of confirms where things are going, where things are headed. There's a lot of history that I could go into it, but it would bore you. I actually like that it's there because I think it's useful to people who are doing the bigger job, which is not just looking at the caucus results and saying, well, Trump won, so he won, and that's it. what's happening is you're measuring everybody against expectations. You're trying to see who has delivered what they needed to deliver and who has failed to deliver what they needed to deliver. And that is a big part of the winnowing process. It's not a finite number that they have to get. It's alchemy. It's kind of, what does it feel like now? The Mondale Hart example. I mean, Mondale wins by 30 points. Hart gets all the news going to New Hampshire. Now you have a race. So it's part of that whole process of expectation setting, which is really the most interesting and I think the most important piece of all of this. Because if you don't have expectations being measured throughout this process, then you kind of take at face value that Trump's winning. He wins the first contest, he wins the second contest. There's no point in having any more contests. But if you see him starting to fail, if he comes up short of what he should, and in New Hampshire, let's say that tightens to 2 or 3 points when he'd had a 20-point lead, now you're starting to interest people and say, well, maybe this is different than what I thought it was. The Iowa results and the first 4 carve-out states as a whole have an enormous impact on what the national polling average is. And so that's why most political experts that you talk to will tell you that, don't start paying attention to the national primary polling average until we've had some contests, because we have to see what they do, what happens, what message is being sent by the voters.
Dave, you're absolutely right that Hart was able to take a 30-point loss and turn it into momentum. And I know the media environment's totally different than it was back then.
Yeah,
but I just find it hard to believe that and again, I don't know enough about how the Mondale campaign tried to spin at that point, because I wasn't working in this profession then. But I feel like if a competent front runner wins by 30 today, they can keep that from being spun as a loss, regardless, unless it's an incumbent president. Seems like if Trump wins by 30, it's not going to be seen as a loss, right?
Sure. No, I completely take that point. I'm illustrating it in the way that I'm illustrating it because it describes perfectly well how the dynamic can be bigger than the result. Okay, so like you fast forward 8 years from then, in 1992, Bill Clinton finished 3rd in New Hampshire, goes on to win the nomination, and the 3rd place finish in New Hampshire, he's the comeback kid. So, I can't tell you exactly where everybody needs to be, but I can tell you after we see the Seltzer poll, we see the result in Iowa, we see the debate between Iowa and New Hampshire that won't be attended by Trump, and we see polling in New Hampshire and the result in New Hampshire, those things together will create a sense of momentum for somebody, and it might be Trump. Right. So that's what matters here.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about DeSantis, and there's some people have submitted some really good questions. But since the conventional wisdom, which I think is accurate, which is if there's a Trump alternative out of New Hampshire after Iowa and New Hampshire, it's going to be Haley. I want to bring in James Lucier to ask his question about Haley. James, if you want to come on camera and ask your question, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. You've been talking a lot about Ron DeSantis and what his trajectory is through Iowa and going forward. And you've mentioned Nikki quite a bit, but it seems that it's been in passing. So I just wondered if you could give a similar outlook for Nikki and her prospects going through Iowa, New Hampshire, and the rest.
Yeah. Let's say she gets a second in Iowa and a first or close second in New Hampshire. How do you see things going after that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because this is the only real path that I can see, and you got to squint to see it, is her path. And it's second in Iowa that I think will fuel her in New Hampshire if she were able to pull the upset in New Hampshire. And that might require Christie getting out, which he seems to have boxed himself in with advertising right now, saying he won't drop out. So, but if she were to get past Trump in Iowa, again, 32 days, she's not competing in the Nevada caucuses. She's in the Nevada primary. 32 days between Iowa and South Carolina. It's going to depend mostly on what Trump says and does in those 32 days. If he loses a contest, we all know Trump. We've watched him over the years. He's very unpredictable how he'll react. What will the Truth Social feed look like? Will he actually take up Twitter again? Will he start out on rallies and go way beyond the pale in how he criticizes and attacks Nikki Haley? I think South Carolina voters are going to be watching. They like her. They prefer Trump. So that's where it stands right now. He's got a big lead in South Carolina. She's She is far and away the second place person in South Carolina. But I think her path is somewhere between New Hampshire and South Carolina. Should she win New Hampshire, Trump has to make a mistake, a big one, or a series of them, or in some way turn off enough South Carolinians that they just come to her defense. She's the daughter of South Carolina. She was a popular governor. And even though their politics are probably closer to Trump's than they are to hers right now, she's got a shot in the right environment with the right campaign. Let's say, for example, everybody else drops out and it's just the two of them and she's within 10 points in South Carolina. Are we finally going to hear the conservative media demanding a debate between Haley and Trump? Because right now they're silent on that. I can't understand it. It seems like it's not in their interest to not want him on the debate stage. It would ratings be through the roof. So I think we have to see what happens in that period of time. I can see a few scenarios where she can either get him on a debate stage or he says something incredibly, just misogynistic or mean or just over the top things that he shouldn't say. You could see her getting hot in South Carolina. And if she were to beat him there, again, that would be, okay, so let's say he loses New Hampshire and South Carolina. A week later is Super Tuesday. That's going to be, that's a little over a week later, I guess. That's going to be the ball game right there. Do those contests have enough of a dynamic change in the race that it can really sort of flip what is expected to happen now based on what we see in the national polls? So that's the path I see. It is a long shot, but that's what I see.
If you were the Haley campaign and you finished second in Iowa, first in New Hampshire, in that month, whose support, who's currently unaffiliated, would you want? Who would be high in your priorities? Tim Scott, other senators, who would you want at that point? And donors, who would you want?
I would want Tim Scott, and I would want as many unaffiliated governors as I could get. And I would want some of my now out of the race presidential candidates. I'd want Mike Pence. I'd want Doug Burgum. I'd want everybody else who ran. I'd want it to be, I'd want there to be a coalescing of people who are all kind of on the same message, which is, you know what, we can't risk this going into an election with Joe Biden, with Donald Trump under, 91 felony indictments hanging over his head. We got to do this right. And she's got the national polling head to head versus Biden to tell the story. You want to win the presidency. Yeah, Trump might be able to beat Biden, but you know what I can give you? I can give you a majority of governors, a majority in the Senate that would be that would last for years. I would be able to take the House, where we got a 2 or 3 seat majority at that point, and I'll make it a 25 seat majority. Because if I can beat Joe Biden in the popular vote by 5 to 10 points, we're going to run up a landslide. It's going to lift the entire party all across the country, and our agenda will be able to get through. Trump, it's about him, and he can't do it.
Would you want DeSantis, and you think she could get DeSantis in that month?
I would want him, of course. I'd want everybody. Do I think she could get him? I don't know. You'd have to see what happens after New Hampshire and how she plays it and what Trump does. The other thing I'd be doing if I was her is I would be just every single speech, every single news hit, I would be calling him out for avoiding the debate, disrespecting the voters. Now we know who it is you've got to face. It's me and you, buddy. Let's go. You need to debate me. And if you don't debate me, people are going to ask why. What are you afraid of? I'd be goading him at every turn. I'd send chickens, chicken costumes to every one of his rallies. I would just flood the zone with calls from not just her, but every one of her surrogates. I'd be going to the media behind the scenes, and I would just be pounding the table to get him on the debate stage. Because I think, that you're gonna need something big to happen, right? We talked about that going into South Carolina. That would be a big thing, and if she performed it incredibly well, which she's definitely capable of because she's a talented performer, that might shake up the race in a way that other events might not be able to.
Yeah. Jeff Corder in Iowa. Do you want to tell us who you're caucusing for and why?
Sure. Well, I'm caucusing for Nikki Haley, and I will tell you that I was a year ago with DeSantis. We had his super PAC people out here a year ago walking neighborhoods, and I thought he was the guy, but he's just kept going down and down and down. And the more I looked at Nikki Haley, she's a Reagan conservative, which I am, which in MAGA world makes us a moderate. And that just seems crazy to me. But
Yep.
I'm strongly for Nikki.
Yeah. Do you
And
think she's going to finish?
my wife
do you
is her
think she's
Polk
gonna,
County
yeah.
chair.
You think she's going to finish second?
That's the big question. It's going to be really close for second. You know, Ron DeSantis has a lot of the structural advantage. I mean, with Bob Vanderplaat's organization and with Governor Reynolds, I mean, Dave Kochel helped build Governor Reynolds and Joni Ernst and every other major Republican that's won here. And they have really strong organizations. And, you know, Nikki started peaking later, and AFP has made a huge difference, but there's no question from a structural standpoint, you know, she doesn't have as many names as these other ones do. But I can tell you anecdotally that there's people they're calling that are independents or even Ds that are considering coming over, go to her events, that really like her. They like somebody they can be proud of and that they can tell their kids that they can be proud of, as opposed to somebody who just trashes everybody. And I say that as a two-time Trump voter, and I loved his policies. He was more conservative than Reagan, but his personal side and the way that he's turned off people, he's been an anchor around our neck for the last multiple elections. And I'm just really worried if he gets the nomination, I'll support him. But if he doesn't, or I mean, if he does, I'll support him, but he could lose.
Yeah.
If Haley gets a nomination, she can win big.
Yeah. What's your sense of the last couple of weeks? Her Civil War answer, her comments, which some interpret as slights at Iowa, has that been played big in local media?
You know, it hasn't been real big. I mean, it's certainly been big. Like Governor DeSantis has brought it up, and I think even President Trump maybe took a shot at it in one of his speeches recently. But to me, it's just inside baseball stuff. You know, if you look at it historically, Iowa winnows the field and New Hampshire picks president. So when she said that as in a joking way, it's true. I mean,
We've heard it before.
Yeah, we winnow it and New Hampshire picks them.
All right, but you were offended by the Caitlin Clark thing, right?
Well, I love Caitlin Clark. We were at Carver Hawkeye. I was on the I laughed about that, and I was on the CNN town hall, and I asked her about that. Told her how great it was to see her at Carver Hawkeye Arena to see Caitlin play basketball the Saturday before, and she sat right in front of us with Ambassador Branstad.
Not since John Kerry called it Lambert Field have I heard such a dangerous sports error.
As a Packer fan, I was really offended by John Kerry, but for Caitlin, the college reference that she's the CNN reporter who's out there a lot with her, I can understand how you might slip up.
Yeah. If you've got a question and you haven't asked it yet and you'd like to raise your hand, either your real hand or your electronic hand, try to get one more of you in. A lot of the questions people submitted in the chat have either been asked or overlap with stuff we discussed. So does anybody have a question they'd like to ask before we close here? Raise your hand if you do. If not, Rick, go ahead, Rick. Unmute and go ahead.
Yeah, my question was more general, Mark and David, and as election experts, I'm curious of the distribution of delegates. For instance, Iowa is not a winner-take-all, I don't think. But do they become more winner-take-all? I'm in South Carolina, so for instance, is my vote winner-take-all?
No, it's not. The four carve-out states, Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina, have always been proportional, and that will remain that way. I think into the future. Where you start to see winner take all happen is really on Super Tuesday, and one of the things that Trump has done without a lot of notice or attention from the media is, for example, in California, delegates used to be allocated by congressional district. So if you won a congressional district, you got the delegates allocated for that congressional district. Now, California is winner take all, and that's a huge, huge number. So you could have targeted a lot of the more sort of like orange. If you're Nikki Haley, you could target Orange County in California, expect to do really well and win several congressional districts there. And Trump might win the Central Valley, Modesto and Merced and all those sort of more rural and agricultural communities, more conservative, and Northern California. So just the fact that California has itself changed is going to have a huge difference on this election. But they trend more winner take all as you get later in the process. And the process really wraps up in first week of June. We'll know, I think, by the middle of March who the nominee is going to be based on a lot of the winner take all states that happen between now and then.
Dave,
go
ahead,
sorry.
Rick, real quick.
As a really quick follow-up, would that solve some of these problems? Who's at the wheel on what state's method is?
The state party chair and the RNC, and state party chairs are members of the RNC. They set all the rules and all the conditions, but in the state party themselves, in each state, you can kind of determine that unless it's prescribed for you by the RNC, which the 4 carve-out states are. So, it's a complicated process. It really requires the party insiders, starting with the state party chairs and going to the RNC to sort of make those changes. And one thing that Trump has done is he's made a lot of personal phone calls to party chairmen around the country to try to kind of nudge things in a direction tactically that help his campaign. So that's one of the things that's been underreported. I know Mark's talked about it before because he's got a keener eye than most of our young, inexperienced reporters that are covering politics these days. But it's what Trump has done is, I think, rig the system, let's put it that way, to help himself with the winner take all states kind of bulking up earlier than they have in the past.
As front runners do. Rick, yeah, go ahead, Dave. Rick, thank you. I want to make one comment about the gaffes and kind of what they mean, because I've been thinking about this a lot too. Nikki Haley said a couple of things that she shouldn't have said. Caitlin Collins is kind of a toss-up. I don't think it affects a lot of Iowa voters that like her, as Jeff said. The Civil War comment, Donald Trump just said that, maybe Lincoln didn't do such a great job because he didn't negotiate an end to it. What was he going to negotiate? Slavery, secession, breaking up the Union? I don't know what he's going to what there was to negotiate. But those gaffes and the way they've been covered felt so pre-Trump to me, felt so before times, pre-2016. So why is it that we're judging Nikki Haley on the pre-2016 standard that we don't judge Trump by, or for that matter, DeSantis? So I think it's interesting, maybe because she presents as such a more normal candidate, maybe even a more cautious candidate, because she came up she had to deal with things like the Confederate flag and that church shooting, things like that. You had to be able to talk in a way that was big and to everyone. And when she departs from that and says something that seems like it could be a mess up, she's treated completely differently than Trump is, or anybody else. Dave, I agree with you, and that's been a failure of the media for a long time. That Trump has just defined his own standard, and he shouldn't be allowed to. But I will say this, and I think this has been true of DeSantis too. Neither Haley nor DeSantis has created magic moments. I don't think you could name a single thing that either of them have done that's broke into the popular culture in a positive way. And you've seen past successful candidates. Even John Kerry came to Iowa with Ted Kennedy and created like a magical moment. And I think that vacuum has been filled by the guests, right? Reporters have to write about new things. One of the things John King taught me early in my career, the first 3 letters of news are NEW. And she's doing nothing new and interesting. And what she's doing new is she's making mistakes. So I think you're right. It's a double standard and it shouldn't happen. But it's also the case that neither of them has filled the space in a very positive way. And if they did something creative, exciting, dramatic, I think it would crowd out the coverage of the guests. And I'm just amazed that they're both successful politicians. They both have talented people working for them. I defy anybody to name a single thing either of them have done that's been, magical, impressive, memorable. A speech, a TV appearance, an interview, an event, nothing. So, Dave, if it's 50 for Trump, which we both agree it could be, who's second and what's their number?
If it's 50 for Trump, that means you got about 42, 43 to divide for the other 2.
Yeah.
I guess I'm going to give the edge to DeSantis at that point. I think if Trump gets held down a little bit, I think there's a little more running room for Nikki. Because I just think she has fewer IDs than DeSantis does. I will say this, and I can't name names, but I know that DeSantis has endorsing legislators in Iowa who are not going to vote for him in the caucuses. So like Jeff Porter, who said he was a DeSantis supporters starting out. There are people who have declared their endorsement for DeSantis who are not going to vote for him. It's not a lot, but there's a few. And if that exists out in the general caucus electorate, that's not great for DeSantis.
Yep, I agree. Dave, you're generous to spend the hour with us. We'll look for you on cable news in Iowa over the next few days. Thank you all for joining. You're going to have more events like this coming up. We'll have an announcement here for the Wide World of News audience about this kind of event on a very regular basis that you'll be able to access over Zoom and over a new platform that I'll be announcing hopefully later this week. So thank you for joining, and we'll see you again soon. And we'll see some of you later in the week. We'll have more events, which I'll announce through Substack very soon. So Dave, thank you. Travel safely, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.